right, welcome back. Today we are going to be talking to Paul Constant. He is a writer for AHOY Comics, and you know how much I really enjoy the AHOY Comics. So he has a new book that just came out yesterday. You might read, if you've read any of the AHOY books. He wrote Planet of the Nerds. So let's bring him in and talk to him. How's it going, Paul?
It's going great. Thank you for having me.
Well, thanks for taking the time to talk with us. And so before we get into talking about Snelson, am I saying that right?
You are saying that
okay.
Right. Yes. It is ridiculous. It is ridiculous, and you are saying it right.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
Yep.
So one of the questions I like to start off with is if you remember maybe the first comic book that you read, or maybe the one that kind of made you want to read more.
Sure, yeah. I started reading comics super early. I think I was looking at them at like age 2, and then I sort of taught myself to read at age 3 with some Hooked on Phonics and things like that. So my first real comic, it's kind of a toss-up between one of the many Charlie Brown collections that my family had lying around the house, or that, I don't know if you know the Bonanza book collections that came out in the 70s of Superman. That was the one that I had. It was it was sort of an anthology. It was a big hardcover. The dust jacket was long gone, but it was blue and red hardcover book, and it collected a bunch of Superman stories from the beginning through till the 70s when the book was produced. So it's sort of a giant Superman anthology was one of the ones. And then there was also a Batman one, but I was definitely a Superman kid when I was learning how to read. And that book, I have a copy of it that I found. I don't have the original. The original I read to liquid, but it's I just remember that book like front to back. Like I will be on my deathbed, and if I have like dementia or something, I will still know like exactly the order of stories in that book. It's just like burned into my brain.
And what was it that made you want to become a writer and write comic books?
I have always wanted to be a writer, and I've loved reading for my entire life. And I think as soon as I realized that writers were people who wrote those books, I just fell in love with the idea of it. And so I've written professionally in quotes for almost like 15 years now. So I got into journalism sort of backwards. I worked at a bookstore in Seattle here called Elliott Bay Book Company, an independent bookstore. It's a great store. It's still around. And then I got work as a book critic for an all-weekly, and they hired me full-time. And then I wound up covering the 2012 presidential election. I flew to Tampa and to Charlotte to cover the conventions and things like that. So I did any sort of writing that was available to me. And I always wanted to write comics, and I did write comics in high school with friends and things like that. But eventually, as a writer here in Seattle, Tom Pyre, who's the editor-in-chief of AHOY and sort of one of my writing heroes my whole life, I loved his the comics he edited for Vertigo. I loved his series Hour Man for DC Comics. He did some Legion comics that were amazing. So I've always known him, but he started to read my political writing in The Stranger, the all weekly I worked at. And he reached out when he started AHOY and asked me if I had any pitches. And I pitched Planet of the Nerds, which was an idea that had rattling around in my head for a long time. And he bought it. And so I was really excited. I was just over 40, I think, when I got hired to write my first comic, and I've loved doing it. So I really, backed my way into the industry over a long period of time, but it's been pretty amazing.
Well, maybe we'll talk about Planet of the Nerds after this, but let's talk about your new book, Snelson. So what is the book? What is the book about, and what is the inspiration behind it?
Well, so it's called, the full title is Snelson, Comedy is Dying. And it's a book about a stand-up comedian named Melville Snelson, he almost hit it big in the 1990s. He was a stand-up comedian who filmed a sitcom pilot and was seemingly doing everything right, but his pilot didn't get picked up, and he's sort of just been sort of coasting on a downward slope career-wise ever since. And he's pretty bitter by this point. He thinks he was deserved, his own shot at Seinfeld stardom and things like that. But he's still telling the same kind of jokes that he told in the 90s, which are not really appropriate now. And so he's basically kind of leaning into that and trying to become a little more edgy and to play into the cancel culture panic that's circling the stand-up comedy field. So it's a book about sort of refusing to change and blaming the whole world for your failures, about a bitter stand-up comedian. And one time I was talking to somebody, and I said, I began by saying, it's a book about a bitter stand-up comedian. He said, "Oh, you mean it's about a stand-up comedian?" And I was like, "Okay, yeah." So it's kind of like that. It's a little bit of a riff on. I was really into those sort of anti-hero alternative comics in the 90s. There were a lot of sort of autobiographical comics, like Joe Matt, Chester Brown did some, Ivan Brunetti did some for Fantagraphics and Drawn and Quarterly, where the main character was just completely a jerk. And at the time, I thought they were the coolest people on the planet. But in retrospect now, as a grown man, I'm like, oh wow, they were really irresponsible and treated women terribly and all that. So it's sort of my way of sort of poking at and critiquing this sort of dynamic that has been in the culture and has changed, and there are people who are refusing to change along with it, and so it's a satire and a and sort of an investigation of this character. It is funny. There's a lot of I make it sound like it's a Russian novel or something like that, but I promise there are a lot of jokes in it, and the art by Fred Harper is amazing. Even if you hate every word that I put into a dialogue bubble, it is a book that is completely worth it for the art.
Now, is the main character based off any stand-up comedian, or did you just kind of pull from what you have seen, or how did you come up with his character? I guess is my question.
Sure, yeah, no, that's a good question. And he comes from just a whole bunch of things that I've picked up over the years. I think that if you wanted to imagine what his comedy like when he was almost at his peak, when he got picked up for a sitcom, is like, picture like a David Cross sort of angry young white man comedy from the 90s, only like with 30% less talent, and you've got a good idea of what he's like. And then he stayed at that level, and maybe the talent sort of dropped off a little bit along the way too. So, but he's not based on any one person, no. Yeah. I mean, like, there are things that he says in the book that are actually just sort of, things that trolls have said online that I just sort of lifted and repurposed a little to fit the narrative thing. So he's basically like every bad male behavior I've seen in the last 20 years sort of amalgamated into one person, which is fun. It's a fun thing to write.
Now, how were you paired up with the artist that you worked with?
Fred Harper. We actually did some Snelson short stories in one of the early AHOY series was called #Danger. And it was it was a sort of a weird mix up of Fantastic Four comics and like Instagram influencers, and it was a great comic, and it was this wild sort of adventurous. The art was a little bit cartoony, and so Tom Pyre came to me and he said, we're looking for a backup story in this book, and we want something that's a little that's more realistic and that's a little, bitter, whereas this comic is more broad, and where the comedy is a little more, satirical and dark. And so I came up with this idea, and so Tom has been great every time I bring him a project of asking, what kind of an artist do you think would work for this? And so we talked it through. I said, we want somebody a little more realistic, but there's a lot of dialogue in the book. So we need somebody who's very sort of artistically adventurous to make all the scenes of it's hard to draw a stand-up comedian on a stage and make that visually interesting. So we knew it was sort of a tall order, but Tom had worked with Fred Harper at Vertigo many years ago. And he suggested him. And so as soon as he drew the first script, it was writing for him, because it was just the complexity and the visual ingenuity that Fred brought to the book was really something. And it also, it so happens that he lives in New York City like Snelson does, and he's very involved in the New York City comedy scene. So he's a fan. He's been to all these, crappy joints that serve bad Chinese food and have a $2 cover or whatever, where desperate, washed up comedians stand up and do their bits. So he really knows the actual scene. And so there are a lot of in-jokes that he's sort of drawn into the book that I think probably even go above my head, but fans of comedy, lifelong fans of the New York comedy scene will find a lot of stuff there that they recognize for sure.
So did you kind of go out and, just observe different stand-up comics to kind of get a feel for how they perform or how, the kind of type of characters they are? Or?
Yeah, I've always been a fan of comedy, but I did go back and listen to some 90s comedy, and there are the people who are always held up as the gold standards, Bill Hicks and some like that. And I got to tell you, some of those 90s comedies albums, they are pretty rough. It was very easy in the 1990s to get a laugh at a comedy club where the punchline is just this person is gay, and everybody starts laughing, and it was oh my god, this is there are things. I don't know if you've seen Eddie Murphy Raw, but the first 10 minutes is just homophobia, and Eddie Murphy has since apologized for that, and all that. I'm not out to re-cancel Eddie Murphy or anything like that. It's just it is the way that it was. It was generally perceived as an okay thing. So I did a lot of research into that, and I listened to a lot of albums that now would almost be hate speech if they were released in a contemporary setting. So yeah, there was a lot of research and things into that as I was writing the book.
Yeah, for me, one of the, I guess, stand-up comedians that you kind of look back and go, is Dennis Leary, his No Cure for Cancer, and
yeah.
And then you see now you see him on TV playing these, the Family Guy, and
yeah, it's weird, and it's I think that it's kind of natural. I think the comedy does it's not supposed to age great. There are some jokes that always work, and there are some jokes that don't, and so yeah, I think it's very interesting. There are a lot of movies from the early 2000s that had a lot of sort of gay panic in them, or hipster, I guess it's called hipster racism, where they're racist, but it's okay, we're cool, and that's the punchline, and it's no, that's actually just racist. So it's just we're evolving and things are getting better, but there's a lot there to unpack.
Now, do you find it difficult to write comedy for the comic book format?
No, I love comics that are funny. I think I think that the Giffen, DeMatteis, McGuire Justice League International was probably more influential for me as a writer than The Dark Knight Returns or Watchmen or anything like that, because I really dug the sort of I think that it's very easy to do comedy in comics. I mean, they're called comics, right? Like it comes from this Sunday strip or even weekday comic strip setup. It's just designed like a joke, right? Like the comics, one of the best mechanisms that a writer has is the silent panel, where like it's such a great punchline. It's like the medium is the straight man, where you're like, oh my god, this is ridiculous, and let's just take a minute to acknowledge that. So I think that the comedy is kind of built into the medium in a really interesting way, in ways that like it's not for prose and for film.
Now you also did a backup story for Wrong Earth, and then like I mentioned, Planet of the Nerds. Are we going to be seeing any more Planet of the Nerds?
Well, we did sign an option with Paramount Pictures, so they are working on adapting that into a movie, which would be very exciting. I don't have anything to do with that.
Right. Yep.
I'm happy enough to be writing comics. I'm not interested in breaking into film or anything like that. So. So there's nothing. We're not working on anything at the moment. There is a possibility of more, and I have some ideas. I'm really happy with the fact that my first book, though, can be read as a standalone. You know what I mean? I love that comics are serialized, but I do enjoy like a story that works within one trade paperback.
Right.
It seems like a lot of them you read now, they just end on it's a never-ending to be continued, and so I love that there's a whole story there. And if we do more, then that can be a whole story as well.
And I also enjoyed your story in the Edgar Allan Poe anthology that Ahoy put out. I loved your story. I think your story and Mark Russell's stories were probably my favorites of the group.
Oh, thank you. Wow, that's high praise. Mark is my favorite writer right now. He's just amazing. So yeah, I love the Edgar Allan Poe anthology. I think it's a genius idea. I love that it's like interacting with old literature, but you don't have to know it, to get the you can enjoy it on a few different levels. And so it was a genius idea.
And you did the Sphinx Story, right?
Yeah.
And was that's a Poe story that you kind of, am I right, or was it an original story?
Yeah, no, it's based on. There's an Edgar Allan Poe story called the Sphinx, and the story, it's incredible. The story is a guy drinks a lot. He's at a friend's house. He drinks a lot. He goes to sleep. He wakes up. He sees this giant sphinx moth climbing a mountain, and he's like, "Oh my God, the world is ending." He passes out again. He wakes up. Everything's fine. He runs downstairs to his friend. He's like, "I saw this giant sphinx moth climbing a mountain." And his friend's like, "Oh no, you drank a lot. What you saw was a sphinx moth on the window." And that's the end of the story. That's the twist, right? And so, of course, in our story, it's real. Spoiler alert. But I mean, how can you not have a giant sphinx moth, right? And I really enjoyed writing that story because it's about like a Werner Herzog type documentarian who's trying to get money from an Amazon techie to make a new movie, and the Amazon techie wants him to make a superhero movie. So like writing that Herzog dialogue was a blast. And so it was a lot of fun to write. I really enjoyed that story. Thank you for reading it.
Oh, well, I mean, like I've talked to Tom and Mark and some of the other people who are associated with AHOY Comics, and they're putting out some good stuff, including your stuff. What is it about AHOY that kind of I mean, you've talked about how Tom and he approached you, but what is it about writing for AHOY? Because they've taken in my opinion, and probably many others, they've taken a different approach to comic books.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the things, it sounds like a line, but I swear to God, if I weren't working for AHOY, like if Tom had never reached out to me, I would be reading all the AHOY comics because I feel like they're made for me. It's like I really appreciate that they're not afraid to lean into the comedy side of things. I think that sometimes there's we all comic fans like me, we spent a lot of time convincing the world that comics were serious literature, and and trying to get them accepted in college curricula and things like that, and so we've basically done that. We've won, right? And so the thing I like about Ahoy is that they appreciate that comics can and probably should be goofy. And at the same time, I think that Tom is requiring writers to bring a certain level of work, a certain level of quality to the writing that other companies don't necessarily have the time to do. They're really sort of intentional with the process of bringing a book along. They don't solicit until they feel like it's ready to go. So they're well written, they're funny, and they really embrace the goofy possibilities of the medium in a way that I think is really appealing.
Now, is your new book, is it like Planet of the Nerds, where it's like a six issue kind of series, or is it there going to be like seasons like Ahoy has it likes to do?
Well, it could have. It could have seasons. We'll see how it does.
Yeah.
And the thing about writing this character is that so Fred and I had done these 5 short stories, which you can read for free in digital form if you want. We will. I don't have the link with me. I'll send it to you after.
Sure.
So we have these 5 short stories, and then Tom asked Fred and I if we wanted to do the series. And as soon as he asked, I hadn't had any ideas, but as soon as he asked, I knew like the whole arc. And I talked to Fred, and we kept egging each other into making it more and more sort of extreme. But this character can just sort of be applied to so many different scenarios. He's kind of like, like how Steve Gerber took Howard the Duck and put him in all these absurd situations. I think he's kind of like that kind of a character where you can reflect a whole bunch of different situations. So he is a character who can continue, and the world around him, I think, could continue for sure.
Now, are there any characters from, say, Marvel or DC that you would like to take a crack at it, and you have this story that maybe when you were young that you wanted to tell, and just maybe now that you're are establishing yourself in comics, and your style of writing that you would like to take a crack at.
Yeah, I am very happy to be writing for Ahoy, but yeah, of course, they're I idolized Mark Grunwald, so all of those characters that he did, like Captain America and Quasar and stuff like that, I really like. Do you know Carcass, the Deviant character from? Jack Kirby designed him.
Okay.
He's
okay.
Like a giant red muffin of a head with.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I don't know what it is. I love Carcass, and he is partnered with a martial artist he's not the Forgotten One. What's his name? Oh man, I'm on the spot here. I can't remember. Anyway, that character I love. I love the Thing. I love. And DC, there are so many amazing characters in DC, like Space Cabbie is a particular favorite of mine.
I could see that.
Yeah. And, I have a great pitch for Commandy, the Last Boy on Earth, but I think that everybody on Earth has a good pitch for Commandy, the Last Boy on Earth. So
I just need more Commandy.
Yeah. Oh, man, I don't understand how there's not a Commandy book every month coming out from DC, right? It's like, I just love it. And OMAC, all the great Kirby things that are kind of underdeveloped, or every generation does a different development of them. I really like those sorts of characters. So yeah, I mean, I'm just like, I've been writing these stories in my head since I was a kid, and I absolutely have a ton, for sure.
Now, I was, when I was doing research, you're also co-founder of the Seattle Review of Books. Can you tell us a little bit about what about that?
Yeah, the Seattle Review of Books was a site that we started 5 years ago, my partner Martin McClellan and I, because we felt like people weren't writing enough about books, weren't writing enough criticism, right? Like, I think that book reviews are sort of an underdeveloped art. And I think that's true in comics as well. You know, I think there are some people who are doing some interesting things, but I think there's a lot of room to sort of talk about what books are doing. And so, yeah, it was founded along those lines, and we wanted it to be sort of Seattle centric because there's a lot of great literary stuff happening in Seattle. There's a lot of great comics coming out of Seattle too. If you ever have the chance to go to Short Run, which is the alternative comic show here in Seattle, it's a world-class convention. It's on pause this year because of some pandemic or something.
What?
But
why would it be on pause? I have no idea.
I don't know what you have, but in Seattle we have this thing. It's a pandemic. I don't understand it. It's really dumb. I don't know why they voted that in. But so yeah, it's so it was devised for that. The site is on hiatus at the moment. We're trying to find out some way to do it without it eating our entire lives. But I also write about books for the Seattle Times, the daily newspaper out here, and Crosscut, which is a news site out here. So I'm still writing about books because I think that's a really important thing to do. And I'm glad that there are organizations that are still covering books at all.
Yeah. So is there anything else you wanted to mention about the new series, or anything else?
No, I think there's a preview of the first issue. I think that if you are somebody who enjoyed, like, I was so happy that we got Peter Bagge to draw a variant cover for the first issue, because seeing Peter Bagge draw Snelson just felt like, oh my God, he's going home. Like he's if you enjoyed that sort of like Fantagraphics bad boy comedy of the 90s, then I think that you'll find a lot to like about this book.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful there are so many choices out there that I'm grateful that AHOY publishes it, and I am incredibly grateful to the people who've already reached out, even though the book came out yesterday, who said they enjoyed it. And so I'm just I'm really excited to have it out there. I hope that you enjoy it. I'm online on Twitter at Paul Constant. So if your listeners have any questions for me, they can come to me directly.
Sure. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to talk today. And sorry, I usually like to put up the artwork and stuff as we're talking about it, but again, the reason why I was late is because I was having technical issues.
It's totally okay. The art is out there online, and like I said, I hopefully we can tweet it out later. But there is a link to 5 short Snelson stories that Fred and I did that are completely free to read online. So if people are interested,
definitely send me the link, and I'll put it in, because I'll put it in post-production.
Great. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
And if you ever have anything else you'd like to talk about, then you're more than welcome back. And are you planning on doing any shows, assuming that this fake pandemic ever comes to an end?
Yeah, I mean, I always go to Emerald City Comic Con for sure, and and Short Run obviously, but I would like to do some more shows. I love visiting other cities and things like that. Although it's been, I can say that technically this year I did San Diego Comic Con, which was a big thrill for me. It was virtual, but it counts, right? So yeah, no, I hope to do some shows once things
normalize.
Get a little safer out there. But yeah, no, thank you. It's really a pleasure to talk to people who enjoy comics, and I'm honored that you read me at all. So I really appreciate it.
Are there any books that you're reading, comics or otherwise, that you would recommend that people maybe check out?
Oh man, I read a lot of comics.
Shock.
Yeah, shock. Basically anything by Mark Russell, I am a huge fan of. I really like. I'm looking around at my books now. I really enjoy. Faith Aaron Hicks did a trilogy of books called The Hidden City. For first, second books. It's a YA book, but it's a really incredible book that I think went under the radar for a lot of comics fans. But there's some amazing action in there. There's a lot of parkour and like running around this city, and you get a real great sense of geography. And Faith Aaron Hicks draws action really incredibly, and I think that's one. Sometimes I feel like we get boxed in our interests, and like superhero fans don't read YA because that's for kids, and which is funny because that's the same thing that people used to say to me when I was in high school is those are for kids. So anyway, yeah. So that's the Hidden City trilogy is a book that I would recommend to anybody who reads anything like Kirkman's Firepower, things like that. Chris Samnee's art. That's one that I will always recommend, and that a lot of people have come back to me and thanked me for recommending it to them. So that'll be my number one today. All
right, well, thank you. I know it's early over there on the West Coast. It's about noontime here, so thank you for getting up early.
Well, thank you for doing this before noon too. I really appreciate it.
Oh, well, thank you, and stay safe, stay healthy, and maybe we'll meet up at a con someday.
Absolutely, anytime.
And you're welcome. And you're welcome back on the show to talk about anything you'd like to.
I'd love to. Thank you so much.
All right.
I really
All right. Thank you.
All right.
Have a good day.
You too. Bye.